And with that, we are unceremoniously dropped into Hydrocity. Or Hydrocity if you prefer. I'll probably say it both ways just because of spite at this point, with both sides of the fandom arguing about it for however many years it's been. But either way, this is another song kind of like Flying Battery, where it's like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Where it's like, it's not that different from the Sonic & Knuckles arrangement, or Sonic 3 & Knuckles arrangement, but also Hydrocity is just a phenomenal song anyway, so there's not a whole lot to really improve upon. Though again, there are some little riffs occasionally that are unique. We also have another interesting thing to point out with Metal Sonic in the previous stage. I'm pretty sure the Phantom Ruby wasn't involved in that, so I'm pretty sure the robot kicking away the Phantom Ruby is partially just to explain why they can have a powered-up Metal Sonic, and then also not have the Phantom Ruby as like a plot element up, like, past that point, so it's kind of a way to resolve it. But again, it's been a long time since I've played the pre-patched version. Obviously that was like 6 years ago at this point, so again, I may be mistaken on that, but yeah, I could have sworn that was also added in later on. We have these little boats here. There's actually kind of an exception to a lot of the Sonic 1 and 2 zones, where again, the Sonic... like, Green Hill is just Green Hill for the first zone, and then the second part gets a lot more ambitious. With the Sonic 3 stages in particular, I definitely feel like they kind of, like, hit the ground running, where they're already tossing a bunch of interesting gimmicks at you from the very first moment the stage begins, regardless of which zone you're in. We also have this bubble. I can't remember which of the Game Gear games this is from. I think my inclination is to say Chaos, but I'm not 100% sure on that. Truth be told, I have played Chaos, it was a long time ago. I haven't played, like, Triple Trouble, though. Probably should before Superstars, in case it ties in. But either way, I definitely feel like, in general, Hydrocity is, like, probably one of the best water zones ever in a video game, given how notorious water levels always are. I'm suspicious of these blocks, to be honest. I am going to see if there's anything above here. Again, since we're looking for giant rings and everything. That might actually be progress now that I'm thinking about it. Again, don't really remember the stage very well, apparently. Yeah, we cannot go through there, so we have to keep moving. But again, this stage is very fun. There's some other cool Easter eggs and callbacks that are amazing. Some of my favorite Easter eggs are in Hydrocity. But again, we'll be getting to that before too long. But yeah, as far as water levels go, this one's pretty pleasant, actually. Again, the music always helped. Again, Sonic 3 was actually one of the only Sonic games I actually finished as a kid. Mostly because it had saving, and the others didn't. That's, like, actually the reason. And frankly, inputting a password every time got old. So yeah, I definitely didn't actually finish Sonic, like, 2 for example, until much later. And even then, I guess you could argue, like, in some ways, I've never really finished Sonic 2 in its truest form, because I've always played, like, the Origins version, or versions where you can actually make temporary saves. So yeah, I haven't really finished Sonic 2 straight through with lives, and with, like, 4x3. So maybe someday I'll go back and actually try to finish the original Sonic 2 to see if I can. But again, that is a game I find very difficult towards the latter half. Sonic 1 also I've never finished without save versions that have added saving, basically. So maybe someday I'll eventually get around to those. I am suspicious of what's up there, so we'll have Tails fly us up. Sometimes when you clip a ledge like that, Tails will drop you because he'll keep flying, but obviously you can't go any farther in that direction. This can be a little finicky, obviously, but it is a very nice addition to the retro engine versions of the classic Sonic games. And again, it's a nice addition that they carried forward into Mania and the 3 version, the Origins version of Sonic 3 specifically. In general, I definitely feel like I'm getting a little bit turned around. I do like how you have the little launchers like in the original stage. By the way, Sonic's full speed animation is actually the CD version, like where he has his arms back, if I'm not mistaken. I'll talk more about it later, but I'm pretty sure you can actually unlock the Super Peel-Out from Sonic CD also at some point. You can unlock a lot of things as well, but again, I'll save that for the end of the playthrough. For now, we have yet another bubble along with a bunch of spikes. I can't remember if there were these little, like, spears in the original. I see Eggman over there, actually, so we're obviously getting close to the boss fight. Yeah, I don't remember the spears there in, like, original Hydrocity. That might be thrown in from Labyrinth, actually. Again, even though obviously this is Hydrocity, and this goes for a lot of the zones, they do borrow stage elements from other Sonic games as well, which I do think is a nice touch in a lot of instances. So for example, you'll see like gimmicks from existing Sonic stages and stages that didn't have those gimmicks originally. And now we have another little falling section, very typical for Hydrocity. So in that case, it was actually a horizontal scroller. The vertical scroller was a different stage, and I think that was Sonic 2's Hilltop, now that I'm saying this out loud. That was unfortunate, but luckily I think we don't need that many rings for this next fight. This one shouldn't give us too much trouble, but this boss fight's amazing. Basically, it is a callback to the boss in Sonic 3 and Knuckles, but the roles are reversed, where we're trying to pull Eggman into the propeller, but in this case he's also dropping bombs that we have to avoid. Again, kind of like the Puyo Puyo boss, this is just a really cool reference fight. It's not difficult or like that involved, but it's just such a cool Easter egg and a nice little like role reversal of a fight from the original. So again, in terms of cleverness, I think this fight's incredible. It's obviously pretty straightforward, but again, for that reason I do really like that. I do like how sometimes if you overshoot the end, the Sonic and Tails have to actually run back over to the start of the stage. We have these little rotating platforms like in Sonic 3 and Knuckles. In general, the sprite scrolling on a lot of things in this game is just incredible. In the actual original games, a lot of things had slightly fewer like in-betweens. So for example, the rotation of certain objects won't be as smooth because it has fewer frames in between. That also applies to other things in like even Origins as well, where certain animations look a lot more fluid because it's actually scrolling at like a higher frame rate, because they actually do have all the frames individually, which is a lot of work obviously for pixel art. Again, I fully believe there's a reason why you don't really see a lot of pixel art games like this, because it takes a lot of work actually animating everything in this much detail. So yeah, this game is very impressive from that standpoint. It's also worth mentioning that I think part of the reason why this game is so popular is because of what came before it. There's a reason why I wanted to go through the classic series, and then also Sonic 4 before tackling Mania. One, to establish like where a lot of design tropes are coming from in this game, and also because I think Sonic 4 actually helped this game's reception, because that was also designed as like a celebration of the franchise, but in that case, it was so unpopular that I think by comparison, Mania also looks better by comparison, if that makes sense. Basically, like, the whole throwback thing being just more overt and not trying to be like, oh, here's, like, not Green Hill Zone, here's Splash Hill, and just trying to, like, be nostalgic but also be original at the same time, while Mania just kind of doubles down on nostalgia in a way that Sonic 4 didn't. I think this was the right call, to be honest. But again, I do think that actually helped Mania having a not-so-great 2D Sonic game in terms of reception preceding this, because it made Mania stand out even more in terms of just how high quality a lot of aspects of it are. Either way, we are continuing to make our way through the rest of Hydrocity. Again, I'm trying to alternate on purpose, just to be silly. Weirdly enough, despite this being a stage that would have had giant rings originally, I actually don't know where any of them would be in this stage. We're getting pretty close to the end too, so again, who knows where they actually are. I have no idea. I saw one just now, so I'm going to hang left here, That is one thing I actually kind of like about the ring placements in Mania specifically, is how in a lot of cases you'll actually see the ring along the path and like before you actually get to it, so it gives you plenty of time to actually catch up to it later on. It's a nice way to kind of foreshadow it and keep you like in the loop that there is a ring coming up shortly, and to keep an eye out for it because you just passed it. Moving on to Special Stage 6, this one's kind of a pain also. There's like not a lot of guardrails, and that's a little bit worrisome. We can easily fall off the stage at full speed if we're not careful, so let's try to be careful. I'm not going to risk that jump right now, just because I was definitely not in a good position for that ring bounce, so instead we're going to go over here. We also want to jump over the corners as much as possible to try to save as much speed as possible, or save as much time as possible. We should be getting pretty close to Mach 3 here, and hopefully we'll be able to catch up to the Emerald. This is definitely one that I have to concentrate a lot for, because again, I definitely don't want to mess up at this point given that we don't have as many rings left for chances. There are 2 more giant rings I know of for sure, so we should be set. As long as I don't botch it twice, which here's hoping. But yeah, there are basically 2 more that I know are actually directly along the path, so we should be good to go. Unfortunately, we don't have Supersonic for this next boss fight as well. Obviously, for the previous one, it wouldn't have helped us at all because we were in the egg mobile anyway, so we weren't exactly fighting. But I suppose you wouldn't have to worry about the mines if you had Supersonic. You could just basically hold down the button and keep attacking Eggman that way and wouldn't have to actually worry about any of the other hazards. I keep alternating between Eggman and Robotnik also. A lot of it's because I am a 3D Sonic fan first. Even though I started with the Mega Collection, I definitely got more time out of Adventure too. So it is a little bit odd trying to actually remember, oh yeah, he is Dr. Robotnik in this game. And again, this being a 2017 game, it is kind of odd in some ways going back to Dr. Robotnik after literal decades at this point of him being Dr. Eggman. So next up is another familiar boss, if I'm not mistaken. We have these little pillars that we have to hold onto, and we have a little machine there. This fight can be a little bit annoying actually. Basically, we have to hit these little bombs and get Eggman or Robotnik to fly into them like so. That will cause air bubbles to pop out, which is obviously very helpful, but we also have to dodge all the spikes along the way too. Basically, the toughest part is these do have a hitbox, so occasionally you can get a little bit snagged on the bomb, and obviously you don't want to hit the propeller, so it can actually be a little bit tricky for that reason. But overall, this isn't too bad. Did Tails get the air bubble? I actually can't really tell there, but either way, that should be the end of Phase 1. Never mind, we still have maybe 1 more bomb to go for this phase. There we go. So, moving on to Phase 2, this one should look a lot more familiar. We have the little washing machine thing from Sonic 3 and Knuckles. As Sonic, this fight isn't too bad. As some of the other characters, it can be a little bit annoying because of jump height. We also don't have the insta-shield, which also makes this a little bit frustrating at times, because obviously we can't get iframes to deal damage and clip through the actual, like, damaging parts of the robot. Also, we obviously have to worry about our ability to breathe in this stage too, so in general this fight can be a little bit annoying. In some ways it's actually more annoying than the Sonic 3 version in my opinion, but luckily Tails finished off the boss for us, including Hydrocity. Mirage Saloon Zone is really interesting for a few reasons. For one thing, I'm pretty sure this is actually the only time in the level where the main trio actually appeared together. Their Knuckles immediately fell off of the plane. This actually leads to a completely unique Act 1 for Knuckles that we'll be checking out later on. It's also worth mentioning that this stage is a callback to Sonic 2 in more ways than one. Obviously, it immediately draws comparisons to Sky Chase. However, in Sonic 2, there were actually plans to include a desert stage called the Sand Shower Zone, but given that game's troubled development cycle, plans were scrapped before release. It actually goes even deeper than that though, because with the HD version of Sonic CD, there were actually plans at one point to add new levels, and one was a desert stage called Desert Dazzle Zone. They eventually decided to keep it as close to the original version of CD as possible, but in a way, Mirage Saloon feels like a full circle moment, both for Sonic 2 and for Sonic CD in terms of the Christian Whitehead and Simon Tomley versions of that game. As an actual stage, I feel like Mirage Saloon Act 1 is kind of slow. I kind of feel like with Sky Chase, it has more of a purpose given that it follows Metropolis and is immediately followed by Wing Fortress, two of the most difficult and stressful levels in Sonic 2, so it's kind of a breather stage. But given that Sonic Mania is a much more forgiving and less punishing game, I almost feel like a wind-down stage like this isn't quite as necessary, though again, it is kind of a nice callback to Sonic 2 in that way. We're now descending to the train tracks, where we have Eggman conducting a train. Towards the back half of the train, we should be able to actually find our final giant ring in one of the train cars, so we'll try to get the final emerald over here. To tell the truth, I actually don't remember if this stage is particularly bad or not. I have a problem with a lot of games where if something is really difficult, I remember it really well. If something isn't as difficult, I don't remember as well, which actually causes more problems for future me. Like right now, where I actually don't really remember this layout because I didn't practice this as much as some of the other special stages. So we'll have to see how this goes. There's not a lot of guardrails here, and there's plenty of mines as well, so we definitely have to be careful. Again, I do like the overall aesthetic of this. It reminds me a lot of the Saturn Sonic games like Sonic Jam's 3D World, and also Sonic R, obviously. But the low poly look of everything is very charming, and even like the low draw distance feels like a very deliberate choice that actually adds a lot of charm to the overall aesthetic. So again, even though this definitely doesn't fit for a Genesis-inspired game, it definitely fits this like classic Sonic aesthetic nonetheless. Let's try to cut this corner here. I'm definitely taking too many risks that somehow paid off though, as we're actually getting very close to it even at Mach 2. We might be able to catch it on this turn. And with that, we now have all of the Chaos Emeralds, and just in time too, because we're coming up on a very annoying boss fight. I'll do my best to hang on to my rings. We need 2 more to transform. I almost fell straight into the spikes, but luckily we do have a shield, so it wouldn't matter too much. In Sonic Mania, we actually have a separate button for Super Sonic, indicated by the X in the top corner. It is the top face button no matter what version you're playing, so it would be triangle on PlayStation or Y on Xbox, but it is X for this version. But with this magnet shield, we'll pick up a few more rings and jump into this giant gun to head to our next boss fight. This one isn't too bad in theory, but I have really bad depth perception, and I feel like it's not any better in a 2D setting. This is the Heavy Magician, by the way. We have one of the caterpillar robots, and basically it'll charge back and forth at us. In another installment of I've never seen that happen before, I didn't know that Super Sonic can actually outrun the plane, so that is very unfortunate that we no longer have enough rings to transform. So we'll have to fight this the old-fashioned way, unfortunately. So yeah, basically it'll jump back and forth. We have to deal damage when we can, but again, because of my really bad depth perception, I feel like this fight's really difficult. Also, it's worth mentioning that Tails actually has a little flight hat on, which I think is really cute, like the little goggles and everything. It's a very nice aesthetic. I'm pretty sure that's actually a callback also. I want to say to the OVA, but I may be mistaken on that. But I could have sworn there's some like older Sonic media where Tails has like goggles and a flight hat. The caterpillar is actually giving us a really good pattern here. Basically, when it jumps from the background and foreground, that's the toughest part. When it's actually going side to side, it's not nearly as bad. So yeah, overall this was a pretty good pattern, but now that I said that, I'm probably going to get really bad luck, or not. We made it through. That might be one of my favorite act transitions for a few reasons. For one thing, I think it's really clever that the goal sign lands on the Heavy Magician's hat, and that's why it's floating, so that reveal is very funny. But also, we have a reappearance by Fang the Sniper. Now not called that because he has a different moniker starting with Superstars. Obviously, this appearance is kind of interesting. It can actually be two other characters as well, Bean the Dynamite and Bark the Polar Bear from Sonic the Fighters, of all things. So we have several very obscure callbacks. As a stage, Mirage Saloon Act 2 is kind of interesting. It has the little rolly robots from, like, I want to say Spring Yard Zone from Sonic 1, but we also have some pinball mechanics from, like, Casino Night and Carnival Night. It's very interesting having, like, a casino aesthetic for a Western-inspired stage like this, but again, also the music is really good. But again, I've been saying that this entire playthrough. It should not be a surprise by now that the music is just thoroughly phenomenal throughout Sonic Mania. I don't think there's a single bad song in this entire game. We also have this little piano that actually acts as a bit of a, like a platform as well. It kind of bounces up like we saw earlier. And I'm also wondering if that's a callback as well, because I know there's a music stage in Sonic Advance 2, but again, I haven't really played the Advance games very much, so I can't really say for sure if that's a direct callback. That's a case of like foreground and background problems, where I didn't even see the enemy there because of the red coloration of the enemy and the red background. So again, occasionally, especially with the original zones, there are occasional problems with being able to actually read what's like a danger, what's a hazard, what's actually just like part of the background. But again, that's not usually a big problem for me. It does come up from time to time, but again, in general, it's not too bad. I seriously immediately run into another enemy. I'm not as worried about this next boss though, so I'm not really concerned about having Supersonic around. By the way, the Supersonic song in this game is fine. That might be one of the weaker tracks, which is kind of a tradition actually. I know for Sonic 3 Knuckles, for example, even the non-Origins versions, the Supersonic theme isn't great, but we might as well transform while we're here. And next up, we have to fight the Heavy Magician, who actually will cycle through different characters. Basically, instead of actually having Fang, Bean, and Bark, it's the Heavy Magician taking on the different forms of the character. Again, this is a nice way to bring these characters back, though we will be getting an actual game with Fang before too long, though again, by the time this video releases, Superstars will already be out and hopefully will be good. But again, with Supersonic, this fight isn't too bad. Hopefully we'll get to see Bark as well, just to show off all of the characters. They all have different attack patterns, but overall, this isn't too bad. Obviously, Fang uses a gun, Bark will cause debris to fall, and Bean will throw bombs, as you'd expect. That was very unfortunate. getting the last hit right as the debris was falling, so I went out of super form and immediately got hit. But either way, we are done with Mirage Saloon.